sandwiches, ice cream, coffee and snacks, and many other pleasing treats. Our foods are fresh and tasty, our drinks satisfying and refreshing. They're so good.
Welcome to Average Joe's Drive-In.
And now, on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 80 of Average Joe's Drive-In. I am your host, TJ Washburn, and all the way from sunny California today with me is Tabitha Lord, author of the Horizon series that has won 6 independent book awards, including the prestigious Writer's Digest Grand Prize in 2016. She has short fiction published by World Weaver Press, Electric Anthonium Magazine, Grimbold Books, and more. She is also a partner and senior writer for Book Club Babel and a managing editor for the Inkit Writers Blog. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm very excited to have you on here. I always love talking to fellow authors on the show. It's always usually turns into just a long-winded rant about everything and anything pertaining to writing, which is fine by me.
Me too. I could talk about it forever. So
you, how long have you, I always like to ask, the people that I have on that are writers, what got you into writing and, how long have you been doing it? Has it always been a passion or something you found a little later on or?
Well, it's a great question because there's a part of me that says, well, I've been writing my whole life, of course, but I really didn't become a writer professionally until about 5 years ago. And so, as a child, if you were to ask me, what did you want to be when you grow up? I'd be writer and then astronaut and then writer and then doctor and then writer and then archaeologist. So I had all these things, but the writer was always under there. And I did, write stories as a child and poetry and that kind of thing. And I started as an English major in college, but I quickly switched to classics as it was just more interesting to me. But I've done writing, through the work that I've done. And I worked in a school for 15 years. I was a middle school Latin teacher and admissions director. But I also did a lot of the documentation that went out of the school and the copy and that sort of thing. And I wrote an accreditation report for them. And so when I was doing that last big project where I had to write every day and sort of really discipline myself to sit down and, get this stuff together. It was like writing a thesis almost, it took a school year. It was about 100 pages when it was done. I sort of challenged myself to try to write something creatively every night, just because I was in the habit. And at the end of that 9-month period, I had my first manuscript. And it wasn't very good, but it was a completed story arc, and it was the first book in what I had intended to be a 3-book series. So I sort of got, the thing that was holding me back was I didn't think I could finish a whole book, like the long, 100,000 words, 90,000 words.
Yeah.
And that was the barrier I sort of had to overcome, which I did at that point. And so then I felt free to call myself a writer and try to make a go of it. So, but really that was only, I'll say I think I wrote that manuscript, maybe it was 6 or 7 years ago now, and then I edited it for like another 2 years before it was in any kind of shape to shop around. I kind of came to the profession late, but I've sort of always had the writer bug.
This is kind of there's a lot of weird similarities between you and I as far as the route goes, because I always, I was always a creative person growing up, but I never actually started really writing my first serious, I did try to write a book in high school, and that was a long story, and it was a kabobble, and I lost the middle section because it was on a 3.5-inch floppy, and it got corrupted, and I never finished it. But, in 2011, I used to be a regular performing musician, and I decided it was time to hang it up and focus on other things and work and my more, paying bills and doing the life thing. And I missed writing, so I challenged myself to write a whole book. And,
right.
And here I am now 7 years later, and I'm still doing it. So,
do you think, though, too, that when you were younger, I mean, I'm not sure that I could have tolerated the rejection that comes with writing gosh, you really have to have a thick skin. You also have to be super vulnerable to put your stuff out there, and really lay down the line. It's very personal writing, I'm sure. Do you feel like that was better for you to be older when you did it? Because I feel like, because I was an older adult when I started doing this, that I had the thick skin to do it. I could deal with the rejection and deal with the criticism and such. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it made it easier for me to handle it. I don't care what age you are. I think rejection in any form, especially on a kindred endeavor, is still hard.
It's awful.
Nobody likes getting that, sorry, we decided to pass on your short story for this anthology, or, this isn't what we're looking for. But I found in a lot of cases, the feedback, I have gotten positive feedback on my stories that people have, liked them, or there was something in there that they liked that they at least complimented me on, or said, but you need to work on this sort of thing.
Right.
And that's been a huge help in kind of pushing me forward, to be better and try to find, because a lot of times I think, especially as writers, we don't see our shortcomings until someone points them out, because, you get so used to the way, you use your vernacular or your cadence or whatever, that sometimes you don't realize how it might be really tropey, or it's
or just somebody isn't what you intended to write isn't what the other party is perceiving or getting from it. And you want, I know with my first draft of my first book, it's two POVs, it's a male and a female character, and I bop back and forth chapter by chapter between their point of views, and no one liked my main male character, and I'm like, oh no, he's supposed to be heroic, and and I got a lot of feedback that he was just too cocky and they just didn't like him. And I thought that wasn't my intention. So I needed to go back and really say, what did I do? What can I do differently to change the perception of this character? And I had to do an entire rewrite of his, of all of his scenes to get that right and to get people to respond the way I wanted them to. It's one thing if you intend to create a character that's snarky or, cocky or whatever, and people are like, yeah, you got that just right. But it's another if you intend them to be, heroic, and they're like, ugh, didn't like him. That's, that's not what I'm going for. And you can't see it yourself. You're so close that you need the feedback. So. And
I think sometimes, sometimes it's just a few little minor tweaks can change a whole perception of a character. It may just be one or two scenes where that character, just because of, not necessarily because of what you wrote, but how you presented it, that it changes the whole perception of the character.
Yeah, or if your readers are confused. That's another spot I ask my beta readers to tell me, is there any place you really are confused? Because I think, we're tempted to write this elaborate story, and it's all in our head, and especially when we write in sci-fi fantasy, we're world building and this and that, and and I advise now when I'm doing writing critiques or editorial work, I'm like, write for clarity first. Make sure your readers understand what's happening, because nothing's more frustrating than you'd be like, wait, what just happened? I have no idea, and then you stop reading. So that's another spot where I think, beta readers or a really good editor is able to pick out the spots where you're, it may be clear to you, but it's not clear to us.
Oh yeah. And I think a lot of that depends on the writer, because I think a lot of writers have a tendency to overwrite, especially on their first draft.
Absolutely, I agree.
I know from a personal standpoint, I have a very dry manner of writing anyway. So my writing is very blunt and straightforward, especially on the first draft. It takes me at least usually 2 or 3 drafts before I got it fleshed out to where I want it,
Right.
So I think that's a key thing, especially for young writers, is realizing everything doesn't need to be in the first draft.
No, exactly. Or you can put it all in the first draft, but no, you're going to cut a whole bunch of it out of your subsequent drafts, because sometimes I think, especially with if you're creating a new world. Now, I've been working in my world now. This is my 3rd book, so I don't need to do that as much because it's there.
Right.
But when I was developing it, I had to write a lot of that stuff down for myself so that I could, get it out on the page. And then when I came back through, I'm like, okay, reader does not need to know this up here. Reader does not need to know this here, and you can kind of pull it back in and then strategically, pepper in some of the details over the course of time, whereas you might be tempted to just dump out the whole world in the first, chapter, and it's like, that's not very fun to read.
I personally find myself cutting out, complete paragraphs in this, even with my dry style of writing. It's just,
Right.
It's getting the minute details in afterwards that I don't worry about on my first draft.
Right, right.
I can do that later. I don't want to lose the train of thought of my story. So I'm going to get that down first, then worry about the other stuff later. And the thing is, you could ask 20 writers this question, and every one of them will probably tell you a different answer.
I know one writer that adds, she writes and she's like, I know in my second round in my revisions, I'm going to add 20,000 words. She's like, I write the bones and then I flesh out the more intricate story parts and give color and life and everything. And I'm like, not me, man. I write that. And then I'm like, okay, red pen, cut.
Yeah.
So everybody does it differently, but it's just, I think the key thing as writers, especially new writers, is to know that your first draft is just the first step. It's a huge accomplishment and many people will never finish, and will never get that one draft out. And so when you do, complete it, it is cause for celebration, absolutely, but it also isn't the final product by any stretch. And I think if you knew that when you went into it, you might not have gone into it and finished it. At least me, I was so shocked that, there was so much more to do after I finished the first draft. But
I know I personally made the mistake of when I finished my first novel, The Returners, I didn't, I was that naive person that I thought I was done. All right, I wrote my book. How am I going to get it out? Bang, bang, bang. I skimmed over things. I didn't really properly edit it. There were so many things wrong with it, and I put it out. And I found out very quickly that people are very unforgiving when there's a lot of mistakes in a book because, you didn't go over it with that fine-tooth comb,
Right. And what I always tell, the writers that want to go indie is, you spend your money on a good editor and on cover art. Those two things. If you have money to spend, that's where you have to spend it. And even if you don't have money to spend, you have to spend it on that.
Oh yeah. I have been lucky that I have friends that are very good at that sort of thing that have kind of helped me out through the way. While it's not granted as good as hiring a professional, it's gotten me by for what I am looking to do, personally, because I've gone the self-publishing route the whole time. Other than the stuff I've submitted for, anthologies or magazines and stuff like that, all my actual novel-length stuff, fiction and nonfiction, I've just released on my own.
Yep.
And and I'm curious as someone who's gone, you seem like you've gone a little more of a traditional route.
Well, no, my books are indie. I definitely publish my books indie, but I have sold, fiction, to more, to presses. So, but when I took my work indie, I had gotten some offers from small presses on the work. And then as I looked at the contracts and sort of thought about all the things I need to do anyway, and the things I'd be losing control over, like timeline. I really, starting later as a second career, I didn't feel like I had years and years to waste before I launched my career, but I didn't want to sacrifice quality. So for me, I sort of made sure that it was in shape enough that I was getting offers on it, and then I sort of said, let me take control of this project, at least this project, so that I have some work out there and the world can start building my following, and start, that every piece of work that I'm writing is contributing towards my career, and so that's what I did. And, it was a good choice because it ended up winning some great awards and I ended up making money off of those awards, which I probably made as much as I would have if I had gotten as a baby writer with a first book in this genre. It's probably what I would have gotten as a deal, so I'm pretty pleased with that choice. I would consider taking another project, traditionally if I could get a better deal with a bigger press. And now maybe with my platform that I've created, that's a possibility, but I've got to finish this series first and then we'll see. But I write, when I write the short fiction, that I don't put out myself, that I either have been, contracted to write, where somebody's asked me to contribute to an anthology and I sign on the dotted line and this is the pay, this is the topic, this is when it's due. And I say, yes, I should be able to do that as a writer. And so I've done that. And then I've also submitted a couple to slush piles that have gotten picked up and sold. So, I've done both things and I'm navigating again. 5 years in, it's still a baby writer, I feel like, I don't know if you feel that way too, but
I feel like I'm still learning. I always feel like I'm learning and I am always learning. I think at the point where you stop growing is when you just stop.
Yeah, you stagnate.
You get stagnant and you
Yep.
get stuck in a rut. It's a one thing I've really been thinking about this a lot lately is, there's a lot more that goes into writing than I think what the average person really thinks, because you're always learning, you're always growing, you're trying to find time to get everything done, and, when people are talking to you about stuff, I put a book out and then immediately had someone ask me when the next book in the series is going to be out, and I'm like, well, I wasn't planning on writing any more books than this, it's just a one-off, I've talked to people that want you to have something out tomorrow. They don't understand it's a year-long process or a 6-month process.
For me. It's a year-long process for me. Now, I know there are some writers that can put out content, and do 4 and 5 books a year, and they're just cranking out the content, and that is just not me. And I don't, even going into book 3, I haven't gotten any faster as a writer. I've gotten better, I don't think I won't spend as much time in edits with this one as I did with the first one, as I didn't with the second, but boy, my process is still my process, and it hasn't really gotten any faster, and I'm really pretty well disciplined, and I chunk my day up into, the things I have to do for my editorial work that I get paid to do somewhere else, the stuff that I need to do for my own marketing and sales and promotional stuff, and then, the creative writing time, and I really do have, I stick to a schedule, I live by my calendar, and I still haven't gotten any faster as a writer. And then, you think about the disparity between how long it takes you to read a book and how long it takes you to write a book. You can understand, if you've never written anything, why people would be like, well, gosh, I'm finished. I'm ready for the next one. I need to know what happens. And you're like, well, yes, but it's going to take me this long to craft something that you'd be looking to read.
Right. And I've seen it, and approach something I've seen a lot of authors talking about, especially recently, is, if they know they're going to do a 3-book series or a 4-book series or whatever, they write the whole series, break it up into chunks, get the first one out, edit the second one, so they, every few months or whatever, they've got a new book out in the series.
Yeah, and that's an interesting concept. I think if now that I'm on the 3rd book, I think, well, that wouldn't have been such a bad idea, because also you give yourself the ability, if you have the whole thing done, to go back and tweak, if you need to, because now I'm here in the 3rd book, right? And I've made some decisions back in book 1 before the entire story had played out in my head. Most of it was there. The bones were there, but there's details. There's little things that I could have done. I could have gone one way or another, and I had to make a decision because I was publishing, and I had to make a decision because, there's a timeline here, but if you did it that way, you could make a decision and then kind of come back and say, well, actually, based on how it turned out, if I just tweak this a little bit, it'd be stronger. And so I don't have that option, obviously. But on the other hand, it sort of does make you tell the story that, I don't know, I don't know, there's something kind of creatively helpful about that too, where you've already had to make some choices so that it's not open-ended and you actually have to finish and you actually have to make some decisions, so.
It forces your hand a little bit that way because there's something already established.
Exactly.
Now, so tell me a little bit about the con you were just at, and then you're going to another one tomorrow. So I'm catching you in between cons.
Are catching? That's why I'm in California. I live on the East Coast, actually. I was at Worldcon in San Jose, and had a really good time. My first Worldcon was in Kansas City. I didn't go to Finland last year. But probably going to go to Dublin next year. And I like Worldcon because it's not really, it's a writer con, it's fans of writing, whereas the comic cons are celebrity fans and character fans. So they're there in their cosplay and, wanting to get celebrity signatures and that sort of thing, and they're comic book lovers. So I tend to do well with sales at comic cons because there's so many thousands of people that pass you by. And so even if they're, if they are readers of novels, then what I write is generally what they like. Right. So it's easy sale. Worldcon is different because that's really, it's a reader-writer kind of a conference, and it's a combination of a conference and a con. And so I divide up my time between selling my books and signing them a little bit and doing workshops. So I did two writers workshops where I was a critiquer. So people submitted their manuscripts ahead of time, 5,000 words, and the 3 critiquers got, a couple weeks to, do an edit, and then we met at like a round table and did a writing workshop, which was really fun. So I did that twice, and then I went to a bunch of panels, and they have sort of really intellectual panels, like the one that I went to where there's an astronaut who'd spent, 3 months on the ISS, and he's partnered with, a woman who is an engineer on the Cassini mission and on the Pathfinder mission for the Jet Propulsion Lab, and then there's next to them there's a philosophy and a philosophy professor. So the panels tend to be very interesting and academic, which is sort of cool because you don't really necessarily get that at Comic-Con. So I went for that. That was 5 days. So I flew out there on last Wednesday, and then my sister happens to live in Folsom, California. So yesterday, after the end of the day, I jumped in a rental car, drove a couple hours, and spending today on her couch, eating. Maybe I'll go to a yoga class, washing, doing my laundry, catching up, and then I'll fly to Chicago tomorrow to do Wizard World, which is a 4-day con. So I'll be a little tired when I go home, but they're fun. I have that's why I have no voice.
I absolutely understand that. Just from the small cons that I have done personally, by the end of the day, your voice is usually pretty ragged because you've been talking nonstop for 12 hours.
You're talking nonstop, exhausted, and let's be honest, the fun happens afterwards in the bar, so you tend to do more than you might normally.
Right. They're always fun, but yeah. And then you've always got as my friend, Jeremy Flagg says, you get the con crud, after every time you do one where you come down sick or, whatever, and because you're just seeing all these people and shaking hands and hugs.
Breathing air in a very close proximity.
Oh, yes, and, seeing all your friends that you only see at cons and different things that you got to run up and give a hug to because you don't see them that often. And, oh, yeah, never fails. I used to run into the same thing a lot when I was playing, when we would play shows, especially in the wintertime in New England when everybody's sick to begin with.
You're locked in a hot, sweaty room.
Hot, sweaty room, and then you go outside and it's 30 below zero, and then you've got everybody in there, and it's just like, I never failed that I would get sick at least 3 or 4 times a winter just from playing shows.
Right.
So it's always it's a fun thing, but you gotta make sure you kind of take care of yourself a little bit too at the same time. Lots of vitamin C.
I was just like lots of exactly. And just this one day of being able to come to my sister's in between and just literally lay on her couch and go to a hot yoga class and drink tea and sleep. I already napped today once. I'm like, this is fabulous. But it's just what I need to be able to get through the next few days. And then usually the day I get home, I'm like, okay, all I'm going to do is unpack and catch up on laundry and go grocery shopping, and just kind of re-entry, so, but they're fun. I do really enjoy them, and I do feel like that's how, in a way, you have to interact with, you have to interact with your fans because they want to talk to you about your books and stuff, and social media is a great way to do that too, but there's nothing like being in person and being able to stand at the table and, and chit chat about stuff you love.
A lot.
So, and I'm fan as I am, I'm as much as a fan of all that stuff as I am a writer, so I have a lot to talk about that doesn't have anything to do with my book,
Oh, I've run into those conversations a lot, when you'll have somebody that will stop by and you're doing the sales pitch thing that you do as somebody trying to sell something, but at the same time, then you get turned on to who's your favorite author, and
right.
Oh, I love that person too. This book was great. If you like that, you should read this book by this person, because this is... Right. Then you end up selling 10 other people's books and they walk off without buying yours. But whatever, it's a good experience.
Yeah. It's helpful to the others because they do it for us too,
Oh yeah, exactly. That's one thing I have found because I just it's only been the last couple of years that I started doing some of the, events and stuff, and I've stayed mainly in Maine. I haven't really traveled beyond that just because financially for me it's not in the cards yet. I'm hoping to get to that point where I can go and do some of the other cons or have them invite me so I can come to some of the other cons.
Right.
Right. But it's I've stayed mainly within Maine, but I've only been doing it for a couple of years, but I have noticed that, it's a great community thing. Writers, out of all the artistic things that I've been involved with, seem to be the most open to kind of help and promote each other and give each other advice freely, and it's not so. It doesn't feel so much like a competition to me.
No, it doesn't, because you know what? If you like a really good book, and I write a book in that genre, like it's good that your book is successful, you know, because people don't only read one book. They read what they love and they want more of it. So, you know, it's definitely that way. But, and I also think too that we're very happy to, it doesn't feel like a competition. It doesn't feel like there's only one piece of, you know, one pie and we all have to divide it up. And if you get that much and I only get this much, it really does feel like creativity is, it's not limited, and the opportunity to put your work into the world isn't limited. So, you know, it feels collaborative and very supportive to me as well. I really have enjoyed the community aspect. It was something I didn't expect when I started writing. I thought you think you're, you know, writer in your own little head in your own little room, and you realize that, yeah, that's true for that part where you're actually doing the work of it, but the rest of it, you know, you're collaborating and you're learning.
And it's weird because I find writers, I don't want to lump everybody into a category, but I find, you know, writers in general tend to be kind of introverted, so it's kind of weird that everybody is so outgoing in that group setting of writers, you know.
Right. It is. It's interesting. And you know, you do get it's funny because the folks that I know that do a lot of work as indies are more outgoing because we've got to put ourselves out there. That's part of what we know is part of the job. Or with small press, you know, like we know now that that's publishing in today's world. You can't really just be behind your desk or your computer or your typewriter and be writing and never show your face. That maybe works for the few very famous people who, you know, have a following already, but today's world, you got to get out there, and I find that the folks that think of it that way, those are who I hang out with anyway, you know, and we are learning from each other. And so maybe the animal is evolving a tiny bit too, the writer animal a little bit, you know, into needing out of necessity.
And I think, you know, like social media groups like the New England Speculative Writers or any groups like that have been good in the aspects of building a community for the people who necessarily didn't know there was a community out there.
Right. There are still people that come along and I'm like, okay, so are you a part of a writing group or do you have, you know, I mean, and sometimes writing critique groups can be a little toxic. You got to get a good one. But there's other kinds of writing groups. Like there's just the online forums. There's just the social media, like you said. And I think that's, and they just don't even know it's out there. I'm like, oh, well, don't live in isolation. It's very lonely if you're all by yourself in your own head for too long.
And I think especially starting out, a lot of writers, I know I certainly did, when you go into it, you kind of go into it with that mindset, I'm doing this because I can do it on my own. I don't need anybody else to help me. I'm going to be able to just do this. And then you realize I do need other people because I need that moral support sometimes.
Right. Even you just need to know, like, oh, how many rejections have you got? How many rejections have you got? And it's like, oh my God.
You know, well, exactly. I bet, you know, I can't remember which writing group it was now because I'm part of about 4 of them. Because I mainly do horror, but my first love, one of my first loves as far as writing and reading goes was, you know, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then it went on to stuff like The Hardy Boys. And then it went on to, you know, R.A. Salvatore and Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. And, you know, so I've kind of gone through all these different genres. And I love horror. I'm a horror nut fanatic. But I have gotten into lately delving more into the speculative side of things with the sci-fi and fantasy and that sort of thing because I love that stuff too. And I don't want to...
Yeah. There's a lot of potential in those worlds, you know?
And I find you can kind of merge them together and do genre hopping too. So.
Yep. Totally.
So being a part of the writers groups, what I was getting to in a long sort of way is, you know, you were talking about the rejection thing. There was a whole thread on one of them. We were talking about, hey, I just got the 4th rejection of the year. And somebody's like, well, that's better than me. I haven't even submitted anything yet this year.
Or I got the 40th rejection, you know?
Oh, yeah. And because I'm one that right now, I really have just got to the point within the last year or so where I have been comfortable enough with my writing and feeling like, because I think as writers we tend to be our own worst enemies sometimes as far as being self-critical and analytical. So I didn't really even submit anything for the first 5 years I wrote. It's just been in the last year. So when I started getting back all those rejection letters, it's like, man, I'm really, I suck at life. And then to have...
I'm terrible. No. And then you realize, because you talk to other people, that it's an industry of rejection. It's baseball. It's the baseball of the writing world, of the creative world.
If you really think of it, okay, so they're going to put 20 people in this book. They're probably getting 1,000 submissions or more for that, 20 slots. So the percentages are pretty good. You're not going to get into it,
No, and you hit the ball 1/3 of the time, and you got a great batting average. It's it's baseball. It's baseball for creatives. It's like, it's an industry of rejection, but that's okay because there's a whole, not everybody has to like everything. That's the nature of the beast. And, I can recognize too, because I do a lot of interviewing and reviewing and stuff for Book Club Babble, and I'll get books that people will send me, and they're writers that have huge platforms, and, they might be a New York Times bestselling writer, and I just don't love their stuff. So I just don't touch it because I know it's good. I recognize quality, but it's not to my taste, and I'm not the person then to gush about it. So I don't, and I think that's legit, and people are going to feel that way about our writing. Not everybody's going to like mine. It would be nice if they weren't trolly about it.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. As far as like reviews and stuff go, your works, usually the people that have the least to say are the loudest. As far as if they have something, I think anyway, the people that are the most negative are usually the loudest anyway, and half the time I don't even think they've actually read your work. There's just something about it that they didn't like, so they're just going to trash it, or they're whatever. My mother, something my mom always told me, and it's always stuck with me, and I'm sure it's one of those mom tropes that every mom has said, and I'm curious to hear if you've said it because you're a mom, is if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all,
Yeah, well, we've covered that up in our household, and if you don't have anything nice to say, shut the F up.
Oh, exactly. And you
absolutely do. We're like, you know what? If it's not kind, and there's a difference, I think, between, because I have a daughter too, so there's a difference, I believe, between standing up for yourself and having your own voice that's authentic and, and owning your truth and having agency in your person, and being kind. Nice and kind are two different things, in my opinion. And really, there isn't any reason to be unkind, except if you have to be, firm. But even that is like, that's a firmness. That's just that's a no. That's a stop, whatever you do. It's inappropriate, whatever. That's finding your voice. But to be unkind, if I don't like something, I don't need to say something in an unkind way. And I get a lot of stuff to edit. I don't beta read for very many people. I've made a point of saying that because I do have to do it for work. So I don't have time, A, but it's a great excuse, B, because I really don't want to, but once in a while I'll meet somebody at a conference or whatever, and they'll say, could I just send you this short story? I really liked what you had to say in the workshop, and can I just need a set of eyes? And I'll say, okay, but just remember, you're not asking me to tell you it's wonderful. You're asking me to help you get it to another level. So just understand that that's what I'm going to do for you. And are you there yet to hear that? But even then, I'm not unkind. I'm like, here are the habits I think that you have that you might want to try to work on. Here's a place where you can, here's where I'm confused. Here's where it's a genuine, I'm not saying, bye, that sucks, like, start over, or get out of the business. No, there's no reason for that. Somebody puts heart on the page, and you don't have to be unkind.
And the thing is, one of the big things I don't think a lot of people grasp the concept of is constructive criticism and just flat out being a jerk.
Exactly. And there's a huge difference. And I want constructive criticism from my beta readers and from my editor, and I need it, and I really do want it. I cry when I get my first, my developmental edits back. I'm like, cause when you're finished with that manuscript, you've labored for 9 months, a year on it, right? You just finally dump it all out. You bled onto the page. You don't have anything else to give. It's the best story you could possibly think you were writing at the time, and then it's going to come back, and you're going to have to rip the thing to shreds and reassemble it. And so I have to put space in between. and I have to be like, okay, I'm ready. I write something else, I get working on another project, and then I get it back from my editor, and sure enough, there's one nice line, like, this is a very high concept, well written, blah, 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 and everything else is red ink and track changes.
Get rid of this, change this needs to be this is too much like this.
So I just have a process. I sit down and I read the whole thing. I just read it. I don't try to argue with it in my head. I just take it in and I close the document. I put it in the drawer. I seriously drink for a couple of days and and then I start to think about it and I think, you know what? There's what she's saying. Some of it I already knew. I was trying to get one by and take the shortcut here, but obviously it didn't work, or okay, she's got a really good point. If that's how she's perceiving it, that's not what I intended. I got to fix that, and then you start getting excited because you can see the next level, and so it's a process. But if she was unkind, I wouldn't work with her, and if my beta readers were unkind, I wouldn't work with them because there's just no reason for that,
Right. And now, this is an editing question because this is something I always like to hear because it's one of those things, again, it's a different process for a good chunk of the writers you work with all have their own methods to their madness. When you get ready to edit, what is your process? Do you put your manuscript away for 3 months, 6 months, or do you...
No, I don't have that kind of time to put it away for that long, but I do put it away for a couple of days. I can't put it away for months because by the time my editor has it, I have a timeline I'm working to now for release, so I can't really afford to not hit deadlines and such. So I just condensed it. Like with my first book, I didn't really know how it was going to be published or what that was going to look like, so I had more time to keep going through rewrites and rewrites and rewrites. And that was a big learning curve anyway. But now it's like once that clock has started and my editor has the document and I've got a publishing like deadline looming. So I do have to put it down though. That is true. She gives it to me. I legit put it away for like 3 or 4 days. While she has it, usually I'm clearing my head by writing a short story. That's like my palate cleanser. I'll try to write a short story, something interesting, but that will only take me a couple of weeks because she's usually got it for a couple of weeks. So that I can do in the meantime, and then sort of that's me letting go of the other story by putting my attention somewhere else. And then I get it back. I read everything she writes. And meanwhile, my beta readers have probably had it and given it back to me. So I'm kind of synthesizing the things I've heard more than once from more than one person. And I'm synthesizing in my head, and then I let it percolate. And sort of a similar thing happens in that time period that does when you're creatively writing the bones of the story is your imagination starts working again, and the creative process starts happening again. You start to see ways to solve the problems that you couldn't have ever imagined even just a few days ago. And then I just dig in, and I try to do the big things first. Like, I'm not going to finesse a scene for language if that scene's going to get cut or moved. So I do the big structural rewrite things first. If there's a character that really needs work, I try to go through and do the big pieces of that first. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll go through, scene by scene and try to clean the language and really finesse the language and get it more elegant. And then, then she gets it back again. And we do that as many times until she says to me, it's ready.
That's definitely a good point. See, I personally have never had that editor-writer relationship because 90% of the time I've self-edited and then, had my proof edits and stuff done by somebody else, but it's been that sort of relationship. I did have a chance to work with David Price on a short story that I had got accepted to an anthology, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of things, having somebody that does this on the regular and how they went about sending stuff back and forth. So it's two very different different processes.
Yep. Yes. The writing is different than the editing, for sure. But you do create a process around editing similar to, you just have to honor it. What it is for me is different for somebody else. And what I always say to people is you find your system that works, and you go about it the way that makes sense for you. And, and it's okay to feel bad. Even when it's the best intentions and all of the critique is really to make the story better, it's okay to still feel like, she doesn't love it the way it is,
I always have that moment where it's like, they're not respecting my artistic vision here. You get that, but I wrote it this way.
You want to argue about it.
Yeah. And then usually I've found when I have worked with somebody that it's like 99% of the time they're right. But then there's always that 1% of the time where you're like, I need to stand my ground on this because I really feel like this needs to be here. Or
right, especially if you're setting something up for the future and it's an important little, maybe, that maybe you need to make it more subtle. Like, I try to always take the feedback and say, okay, but my editor's great, and some of my beta readers, they never tell me how to fix it. They just tell me what's bothering them about it. So then I have an opportunity to say, okay, but I need to keep this because it's really important, but if this is bothering them, maybe I can tweak it like this, or whatever. But if I want to go head to head about something with my editor or beta readers, they always, 99% of the time, they win because they're, it's, the editor's the professional. That's what she does for a living. She knows how to make a book better. And if she says I need to pay attention, I do, even if I don't want to.
From a personal experience, I think a good beta reader is worth their weight in gold. Because I know my last novel that I put out, I finished it up. I was really happy with it. I did a couple edits, and then I sent it out to my beta readers. And I have 2 or 3 people that are fairly regular beta readers for me, and there's a reason for that, because one, they do enjoy my stuff, but they are very unapologetic if they don't think something's working. And
right. Those are very valuable beta readers, absolutely. And you got to give them instructions, I find. I want you to read and let me know if there's places you skip pages. Because if you skip pages, other readers are going to skip pages. I want to know how you feel about this character. I send out a little survey
usually with them saying, this is what I'm looking for with this. Does, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, let me know. And then there's kind of that general overall, what did you think about the book, But my beta readers come back to me with, and this was the first time I ever changed the ending of a book. I got feedback from all 3 of them, said, I love the story, but that ending just seems way too abrupt. It's missing something. I just feel like you're leaving something, it's fine the way it is, but it could be better. There's something missing. And I got that back from all 3 of them, and
yeah, you have to pay attention to that. When everybody says the same thing, you have to, say, okay, they're having an experience with my work that I didn't intend. So I want them to have the experience I do intend for them to have, which is a satisfying ending.
And it was funny because originally I had wanted to do something else with the ending, but I felt like it might be too much. So hearing that feedback from them, that was like, okay, it gave me the green light that wasn't going to be too much, or it could have still been. Right. So I didn't even rewrite the ending. I added on what I kind of had originally wanted to do. And I sent it out to him, and one of my beta readers, she sent me back feedback, and she's like, oh my God, that was incredibly creepy, and that made that book so much better by you just adding that chapter on at the end. So it was like, all right, excellent. And then the other beta readers basically got back to me with the same type of feedback, and I was like, I'm glad I listened to you and didn't just say, no, this is my vision and this is how it's going to be,
Right. And people just, and newer writers, it's harder to do. You tend to hang on tighter, and then you realize the more stuff you write, the more you realize you don't have to hang on that tightly,
Sometimes letting go is the best thing for the story, as much as painful as that can be sometimes. So you're currently working on your 3rd book in the series. So
third and final.
So I do want to talk a little bit about that. So just give a little summary for the listeners out there who aren't familiar with your work, what this series is about and what's going on with this 3rd installment.
Sure. So I intended when I sat down to write that it was going to be one book. But very quickly when I started, I realized it had that feel of a trilogy, the first, middle, and last. Like there was this smaller story within the context of the larger, galaxy sort of thing to make it that epic space opera. And so I took a couple weeks off and I outlined, the 3 books. You have to get from here to here in this one, here to here in this one, and here to here in this one. And of course the first one, and this will bring me to when I say a little bit later about why the 3rd one's taken me a little longer. You're thinking about that story for so long with the first one that, it just kind of tumbled out onto the page. And then while I was editing the first one, the bones of the second one were becoming solidified, and I would be adding little hints and clues into the first one to sort of bring it to the second one. And then, but the third one, though, I really needed to wrap things up. And I needed to do it, I felt like I'd created a more complicated plot, and I didn't just want to blow up the Death Star, and so it took me a little while to figure out how to end my series with integrity and with it not being all tied up in a neat bow yet still be satisfying. So that's why the third one has taken me probably 6 months longer to draft than I had intended. But anyway, the premise that I started with was so first of all, it's colonization. There are no creatures or strange and, alien animals. We're all humans in my universe that I've created, and it's space opera. So I'm more concerned about the human character development and the interactions than I am the tech. And I do write some more hardcore sci-fi, but I do that in my short fiction. So this is definitely space opera. So you're getting that versus more techie sci-fi.
It's more about the human condition than the other aspects of it.
Exactly. So the premise I set up was, what if on a distant world that had been isolated for quite some time, part of the population evolved differently from their neighbors and could do things with their mind empathically and telepathically? How would that impact the fabric of the civilization? And so when you meet my main character, she's on the run after escaping the near genocide of her people. And so that's where I start. And then a ship crashes. She saves the pilot with her gift because she's a healer. That's part of her empathy and telepathy. And realizes he's not from her world, and in fact her world once was a colony, a lost colony. And so she's swept back up into the greater intrigue. So we have the two stories going on. We have the one on her planet with the resistance movement that she was part of, in the battle and the war between the cultures there. And then we have this overarching bigger theme, and it does loop back around and come full circle into her home world. So that,
in a nutshell,
in a very brief nutshell. And one and book two both feel a bit like World War II resistance movement set in space. And then the overarching story has more of like a Star Trek-y, bigger picture kind of feel to it.
That's an interesting combination of scenarios and worlds if you look at it in that aspect of
yeah, because her world has been pretty isolated for a long time, and their backstory is they were once a thriving colony, part of the rest of the and they had their own internal war and nearly destroyed themselves, and so they went dark for a long time and were lost. And as they're recovering, this trait emerges, and later you do understand whether it's intentional or accidental. That becomes part of the story. But in the beginning, you don't know. You just know that there are these two civilizations, these two types of people that live on this world, and they don't get along because one is very fearful of the other, and eventually, a battle ensues, a genocide, really.
Now, if people want to check this series out, where are they able to find it?
You can write Amazon. It's pretty. The ebook is on all the platforms, and the regular book, if you go through Amazon, most people do, you can get it there. You can go right through my website and click through to the purchasing venues.
So while we're on the subject of your website, what is your website?
It's just TabithaLordAuthor.com.
Nice, neat, and simple.
Yeah.
A question I always like to ask my guests, because, Average Joe's Drive-In is about getting, the word about different entertainment subjects out there, but I always like to ask my guests questions about film, and I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
Sure.
So,
okay.
So, has there been any like recent movies or any movies that you have been really into lately?
How about if I go with TV series?
That also works too.
Yeah, I'm a binger. When I do watch something, I'm a binger. So I binged on Altered Carbon recently, which I loved. And I loved that because I like dealing with those concepts that are sort of really tricky. And I thought that one was, what if you take mortality off the table? What happens to human beings? And I thought that was a really fascinating story. And I haven't read the book behind it. I didn't know it was a book until the movie came out, so I do plan to. And The Expanse I also really love, and I had the pleasure of meeting Cass Anvar at the Big Apple Con, and we spent quite a bit of time talking because the con wasn't very busy. And, we were just talking about how sci-fi is a place where you can explore these really deep concepts, meaningful concepts, but with sort of this safety of distance, so you can be playing with things that are happening in the real world, but you're looking at them from the safety of another world, and so you can really play into that and really see them through to some inevitable ends and some unexpected ends and sort of explore. And that's why I think I love the sci-fi genre so much, the speculative genre. So The Expanse and Altered Carbon have been two favorites. I also have to say, in the Marvel universe, I really loved The Punisher. I watched that in like 2 days. It was a very bad sleep time for me. But that was real. It was gritty and violent, but wow, it was good.
Altered Carbon is one that I think it looks absolutely fascinating. The whole concept behind it is fascinating. And it's one I really want to get into, but I have a really weird thing with TV shows where I will avoid them because I'm afraid I will do the same thing. When I get into a show, I will binge it, and then I get nothing else done.
Well, that's the problem.
And I'm the type of person that. And that's one of my big issues is I am the type of person that always has 14 different projects going on at once, and I never have time on top of working my full-time job trying to get everything in that I want to do. I still create music on the side on my own. I write, I recently had one of my short stories is being adapted into a film, so that's been going on, so I've been helping with that. I just recently rejoined a paranormal investigation team that I was a part of years ago.
Oh my God, super fun. So yeah, you don't have a lot of time for TV. I don't either. But the thing is sometimes when I'm working through some kind of a complicated plot, like I'm stuck, I will watch stuff and I'll be like, now how do they, dig their characters out of this mess they made? Like what are some of the ways, and I get ideas. And it's not like I'm trying to copy the ideas, but I'm trying to see like the technique, all right, you've dumped your characters into this. I don't see a solution as the viewer. Like I have no idea how you're going to dig them out of this. And so when they do, I'm inspired by that and I say, aha, there are ways you didn't think of to get them out of this or to not get them out of that. Maybe, that's the solution. So I do watch everything I do now when I read or watch or whatever is got the writer-creator eye as well as the person that's enjoying it,
Oh, for sure. And that's, and that's one of the reasons I do that with movies. I'm a movie fiend. I love movies, but part of the reason I'm a movie fiend is I can sit down and watch a movie and then I don't have to worry about the next episode or the next whatever. My movie's done. I will, I also, as busy as I am with creative projects, I also need to have that couple hours every day where I'm not worrying about that stuff. So for me, I watch a movie. And I watch an asinine amount of movies because of that. But I don't generally watch TV unless I'm watching the Patriots or the Bruins. I don't usually watch TV,
Yeah, well, because you can get sucked in, and then before you know it, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. You're like, crap, I got to get up at 6.
For me, it's 4 a.m. Yeah, exactly. You get up early, so you've got that time period. It's like I try to set that block aside every day. I know I'm going to get home. I need like 30 or 40 minutes to unwind. I'm going to take this 3 hours right here, and that's going to be set aside for my whatever creative project I'm focusing on that day, whether it's the podcast, whether it's writing, whether it's creating a song. That's my 3 hours. After that, I need to stop and let my brain reset a little bit and do something and relax. So, and that's the only way to, I guess, and I have a tendency usually most of the time to be very organized when it comes to that stuff. Like I have to plan ahead. I'm not one of these people. I don't know about you, but I'm not a spur of the moment person.
No, me either. I am a planner, and I mean, I have to be somewhat flexible because, two of my kids have moved out and are grown, but, at one time I had 4 children living in the house. You have to be flexible, obviously, but I still plan the framework out. And then if something unexpected happens, the first thing I do is sort of like deal with the crisis, deal with whatever's happening, and then go back in and rework my calendar and rework, when are each of these pieces going to get done. So yeah, I block it out in chunks of time. I have a daily planner. I look about a week ahead at my stuff. If you were to see my system, you'd be like, wow, this feels really OCD.
And that's the one thing. I think you have to find the system that works for you because Now, see, my scheduling I basically do in my head. When I'm at work, I'm thinking of about 1,800 things that I want to do, or a story that I want, or the story I'm working on, what am I going to do with that when I get home? I need to progress from here to here today. Or I'm going to work on the podcast today. Or I'm going to do this sum and I want to do this, this, and this. But I'm planning it out so when I get home, I've already got an idea. Maybe that's not the best thing to do while I'm working, but it makes my day go by a lot better.
Right, right.
The monotony and repetition of work often that breeds that whole creative thing for me sometimes. But I also take ideas from when I'm working, or things I see, or little observations, or whatever, and I try to use that in my story sometimes, of the observations.
Well, right. Isn't that it's like we've completely changed as like there's just no more showing up in the world not as a writer, or an observer, because that's everything is fodder for.
Oh, exactly. What? Don't make me mad or I'll kill you off in a book type thing, that sort of author mentality that you have, though, because you are always looking at situations, scenarios, anything is exactly, it becomes fair game. So, you said you've been doing some short story stuff as well before we wrap things up, because we are getting around that hour point. It went by quick, like we were talking about off air beforehand. So do you have anything that's coming out or just recently come out for short story work that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just released, I think in May, the end of May, an anthology called Holding On by Our Fingertips, and it's Crystal Inc., which is an imprint of Grimbold Books, and they're out of the UK. That was one where the premise was each story would deal with the last 24 hours of human existence, and there was no question this was the apocalypse. It didn't matter how the apocalypse was happening or why. You could take it in any direction, but you had to deal with that parameter of it. It's imminently ending, so that was super fun. That was one of the ones I got asked to contribute to. And here's the deadline, here's the theme, can you do it? And I said, yes. I had no idea. And I was like, oh no.
That's heavy subject matter too,
Yeah, it's heavy subject matter, and I really did, it's actually one of my favorite stories that I've written, just the way it came out, because I wanted it to be somewhat hopeful, but I also wanted there to be real poignancy to it and real, tragedy, obviously, but, so it was really interesting to write. That, and I'm very proud of it, and it's out now. So, Holding On by Our Fingertips, and my story is called Keeper of the Light.
Is that also available on Amazon or through the publisher's site?
Yeah, both. I'm sure I've seen it on Amazon, so I know if you just type in the title, it pops right up. But the publisher is Grimbold Books or Crystal Inc. Crystal is an imprint, so I don't know if they have their own separate distribution, but I don't think so.
So is it, before we wrap it up, is there anything else you wanna add in?
I don't think so, other than, I'll be in Chicago. If anybody's in Chicago next week at Wizard World, I'll be there signing books, and then I'm going to be getting to work to finish up book 3, because it's time, and I think I've noodled out the problems, so I'm going to just get the work done now and write them out. So it was really a pleasure to talk to you for this hour. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on, and before we end the show, I want to thank my sponsors, the Maine Cannababes. They are an awesome group of people doing some great things with cannabis legislation, medical, and otherwise. You can find lots of great resources. Their calendar they are doing this year, they are currently, I don't think they found a beneficiary this year. For those of you who aren't familiar or who haven't listened to the show before, each year they pick a beneficiary where they do the calendar, and all the money raised from that calendar goes towards helping that person with like legal fees or medical expenses. And it's all done voluntarily. They are awesome, awesome people. Go to maincannababes.com to find out more information. Meet this year's calendar, girls, and find out what's going on with that. And I would like to thank Tabitha for coming on the show and hanging out and talking. It's always fun to talk to somebody new who you haven't talked before, because, it's always good to meet new friends. And, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I just want to leave with these final words. Remember, kids, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, and I will see you sexy animals on the flip side.
It's intermission. Rise and stretch time. Time to refresh yourself and visit our snack bar. Got a yen for hot popcorn? Your favorite soft drinks are sparkling cold. The juicy Frank's sizzling hot. There's delicious coffee, freshly brewed, and all kinds of ice cream and candy to tempt you. Showtime will be announced loud and clear to get you back to your car in time. So stretch your legs. Come to the snack bar now.
Thanks for listening to Average Joe's Drive-In. If you'd like to talk movies or contact the show, add our social media pages. You can add us on Facebook at Average Joe's Drive-In Podcast, on Twitter at TWJ Author, on Instagram at Thomas Washburn Jr. You can also hit up www.thomaswashburnjr.com for more information about the show and related links. If you'd like to support the show, you can buy TJ's books on Amazon. Just type in Thomas Washburn Jr. in the search. Books are available in Kindle and paperback formats. If you have Kindle Unlimited or Prime, you can read the books for free and money will be earned by the pages read. It doesn't cost you anything and it supports the show. Until next time, you've been listening to Average Joe's Drive-In.